is a country above Mexico and below Canada, in between the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans, and it's beautiful. In the year negative a billion, the American economy wasn't really a thing. In the year 1700, it was a thing, and it was tied very closely to Britain's. King George kept very high taxes on things like tea and stamps. Most goods produced by Americans were agricultural or handicraft production. Everything else was bought from our friends across the sea. Of course, many Americans didn't like this, so it's time for a revolution! In 1773, patriots decided we needed to take some time for ourselves and be alone for a bit. So they hurled a shipment of tea into the Boston harbor. Knock, knock. It's the king. And he didn't like that. So he closed the port of Boston and took away all forms of self-government in the colonies. Surprisingly, the colonies didn't like that and formed a secret government, which effectively seized power, and war began. Things looked bleak for the Patriots, but in the Battle of Yorktown, with help from both France and the spies, the world was changed, and the British Parliament said, "This sucks. You can have your independence, I guess," and voted to end offense in 1882. The war ended in 1883, and the United States of America was finally free, meaning they now got their own economy to take care of. In the Constitution, adopted in 1787, it stated that the nation would be a common market with no internal taxes on interstate commerce. Our first Secretary of Treasury, Alexander Hamilton, argued for the national government to assume states' debts and pay for it by taxing whiskey, enabling the U.S. to pursue economic growth. He also created the first bank, page turn, the first bank of the United States. The United States economy was flourishing, and we were able to open up more international trades. This was interrupted by the British and French Quasi-War. The Jefferson and Madison administrations were unhappy with this and began economic warfare with Britain from 1807 to 1812, and it became a full-scale war from 1812 to 1815. This severely damaged mercantile interests. Throughout the beginning of the 19th century, the United States were still pre-industrial. Most goods were agricultural, and most of the remaining workforce was holding exports. The U.S. built the best ships in the world. And you know what? Water power was the dominant source of industrial power until after the Civil War. The building of roads and canals, the introduction of steamboats, and the first railroads were the beginning of the transportation revolution. Knock, knock. It's rapid expansion. Rapid expansion of settlements to the west, and the Louisiana Purchase of 1803. Knock, knock again. Babies, and lots of them. The average age was under 20 with children. Everywhere. The population exploded from 5.3 million people in 1800, living on 865,000 square miles of land, to 9.6 million in 1820 on 1,749,000 square miles. By 1840, the population reached 17,069,000 on the same land. Adoption time! New Orleans and St. Louis joined the U.S., and new cities were begun at Pittsburgh, Marietta, Cincinnati, Louisville, Nashville, etc., etc., etc. Anybody get the reference? No? Okay. The U.S. economy in the early 19th century was known for labor shortages. All types of labor were in high demand, especially unskilled labor and experienced factory workers. Labor prices were typically higher in the U.S. than in Britain by 30 to 50%, so, Britain. Subject change. Did you know that only 100 miles of canals had been built in the U.S. by 1816, and only a few were actually longer than 2 miles? The Erie Canal, which connected Albany, New York on the Hudson River, with Buffalo, New York, which reaches 325 miles, began operation in 1825. Steam power. In 1780, the U.S. had 3 major steam engines, which were all used for pumping water, 2 in mines and 1 for New York's water supply. The most power in the U.S. was supplied by water wheels. Mechanical power transmission. In 1928, Paul Moody substituted leather belting for gearing in mills. Also, steamboats and steamships were also still pretty cool. Now, railroads were created by the English, but in the 1850s, the Americans developed an awesomer way to make them. Ohio had lots of them. In fact, Ohio's railroads put the canals out of business. It's all about the money, money, money. Yeah, we want your money, money, money. The absence of the first Bank of the United States after 1811 caused serious problems for the national government trying to finance the War of 1812. Now, subject change! For many years following the Great Depression of the 1930s, when danger of recession seemed super duper serious, the government strengthened the economy by spending heavily itself, or cutting taxes so people would spend more. This created rapid growth in the This created rapid growth in money supply, which then encouraged people to spend more and more moolah. This really cool guy named Franklin Delano Roosevelt came up with this really, really cool idea called the New Deal. Da, da, da. This era began in 1933. To the Great Society initiatives of the 1960s, national policymakers relied on fiscal policy to influence the economy. Knock, knock. More babies. The baby boom saw a dramatic increase in fertility from 1942 to 1957. That means a lot of babies and not a lot of time. This was caused by delayed marriages and childbearing during Depression years, a surge of prosperity, and a new optimism for the future. The U.S. economy grew by an average of 3.8% from 1946 to 1973. This was a golden era of economic growth, spread evenly among wealth classes. Crash noise. Again, the stock market crashed. Luckily, not as bad as in the late 20s, with much less of an impact, thus ending the golden era of economic growth. In 1981, Reaganomics, it was so funny. Reaganomics was introduced by President Ronald Reagan. Because of this, inflation dropped dramatically and 20 million jobs were created before Reagan left office. The Great Recession. That's funny because it rhymes with the Great Depression. Yeah. The Great Recession. A series of economic disasters? Who wrote this? That barely looks like the word disasters. Dang it, Maddie. Disasters. A series of economic disasters hit in 2008 to both the American and European economies. Banks collapsed, some going entirely bankrupt. The stock market fell 40%. Currently, the American economy is one of the strongest economies in the world. That's all for now. Bye!